My husband drained my savings to buy his mistress a condo. He didn't know I had recorded every word. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store felt like needles in my eyes. I swiped my card for a week's worth of food, but the machine let out a cold, sharp beep. Declined. I felt a blush of heat creep up my neck. I tried my savings card, the one holding my grandmother's $250,000 house fund. That money was my safety net, my history, and my future. Declined again. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I opened my banking app, praying it was just a technical glitch. The screen loaded, and my breath hitched. The balance was zero. A single wire transfer had gone out that morning to an escrow company. The memo read, Unit 402, surprise for Bree. My world turned gray. I walked into our house, my legs feeling like lead. The hallway was filled with the cheerful sound of Silas whistling in the shower. He sounded so happy, so carefree, while my heart was shattering into a million pieces. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked straight to his gaming room and locked the door. Last week, I had hidden a small, voice-activated recorder in the back of his desk after I noticed him taking whispered work calls at 3 a.m. I pulled it out and hit play. My husband's voice filled the room, sounding oily and sweet. Don't worry, Bree baby. The condo is in your name. Ruth is too stupid to check the accounts until tax season. By then, we'll be in Cabo. The recording clicked off, leaving me in a silence that felt like a grave. As I sat in the dark, my mind raced back 5 years. When I met Silas, he was a struggling actor with nothing but a mountain of debt and a charming smile. I was the one with the career. As a top-tier forensic accountant, I had spent my life finding hidden money for other people. I used my own earnings to pay off his predatory loans. I bought his expensive suits and paid for the headshots that built the successful image he used to strut around the city. I remembered him leaning against our kitchen counter, holding my hand and saying, "Your brain and my face, we're a team, Ruth." I realized then with a sickening clarity that we weren't a team at all. I was never his partner. I was just a bank he had been robbing since the very first day. The bathroom door opened, and Silas stepped out, wrapped in a plush towel I had bought him for Christmas. He smelled like the expensive sandalwood soap that I kept stocked in the shower. He saw me sitting there and flashed that famous, dimpled smile that used to make my heart melt. He walked over and pulled me close, his skin still damp and warm. He whispered into my ear about taking a weekend trip, just the two of us, to reconnect. He acted like the perfect, loving husband, but all I could feel was a violent surge of nausea. I knew the truth now. That trip wasn't for us. It was a cover story so he could move Bree into the luxury condo he bought with my grandmother's legacy. If you're enjoying my journey to justice, hit subscribe for more revenge stories. I didn't pull away, and I didn't slap him. Instead, I leaned into the cold, professional part of my brain. I told him I had a big project due and needed to work late in my home office. He kissed my forehead and went to bed, probably dreaming of his new life. I spent the entire night hunched over my laptop, but I wasn't doing firm work. I was using every forensic tool in my arsenal to trace every single cent Silas had moved in the last 2 years. My eyes burned as the spreadsheets began to tell a story of betrayal deeper than I ever imagined. The $250,000 wire transfer was just the grand finale. I discovered he had been skimming small amounts from our joint mortgage payments for 18 months. He had been planning my ruin for a long time. The name Bree haunted me until 3 a.m. when I finally cracked the encrypted files on Silas's backup drive. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. Bree wasn't just some girl from the gym. She was Bree Sterling, the 24-year-old daughter of Arthur Sterling. Arthur was my biggest, most prestigious client at the accounting firm. He was a man who valued family and reputation above all else. If Arthur found out I was connected to a scandal involving his daughter, my career would be over in a heartbeat. Silas knew this. He had picked her specifically because she was my greatest vulnerability. He wasn't just stealing my money, he was holding a match to my entire professional life. If this blew up, I would lose everything. But if I played this right, Silas's life was about to become a living hell. The next morning, I drove to the glass tower downtown. Unit 402 was a palace in the sky with floor-to-ceiling windows. I wore my most expensive blazer and carried a leather clipboard, posing as a high-end interior designer. I told the building manager I was there to take final measurements for the new owners. He didn't even ask for ID, he just let me in. The apartment was beautiful, paid for by my grandmother's hard work. My stomach twisted as I walked through the rooms. The walls were already covered in framed photos of Silas and Bree laughing on beaches I had never visited. They looked so happy in the home I had funded. In the master closet, I found a velvet box. Inside was my own diamond tennis bracelet. Silas had told me months ago it was lost at the gym. I picked up the bracelet, the diamonds catching the light. It had belonged to my mother, and seeing it on Bree's vanity felt like a physical blow to my chest. Silas hadn't just taken my cash, he was handing out my family heirlooms like party favors to his mistress. I tucked the real bracelet into my pocket, my heart racing. I had anticipated this. I reached into my bag and pulled out a high-quality fake I had purchased from a costume shop earlier that morning. It looked identical to the untrained eye, but the stones were glass and the metal was cheap. I placed the fake bracelet back exactly where I found it. I wanted her to wear it. I wanted her to feel like a queen while wearing a lie, just like the men who gave it to her. I went home and acted like the perfect, supportive wife. When Silas walked through the door, I greeted him with a glass of wine. "I'm so proud of your hard work lately," I said, my voice steady and sweet. "I want to celebrate. I'm hosting a dinner party this Friday for your friends and your boss at the theater." I paused, watching him closely. And since he's been so helpful to my career, I invited Mr. Sterling and his daughter, Bree, too. Silas's face turned a ghostly shade of white. He began to stammer, trying to find an excuse to cancel, his eyes darting around the room in a panic. But I just smiled and showed him my phone. "It's too late to say no, honey. I've already sent out the digital invites and everyone has confirmed." That night, I checked the hidden microphone again. I heard the sound of Silas pacing in his office, his breathing heavy and ragged. He called Bree immediately. "She invited your dad," he hissed into the phone. "I don't know what she's playing at, but we have to be careful." I heard Bree's high-pitched giggle through the speaker. It was a sound of pure arrogance. "Relax, Silas," she said. "Ruth is a boring nerd. She smells like spreadsheets and old paper. She's probably just trying to suck up to my father for a promotion. She's too stupid to notice anything." My jaw tightened until it ached. Then Bree added something that made my skin crawl. "Just make sure she signs those home equity papers before the dinner. Once that's done, we can finally kick her to the curb." The next morning, Silas walked into the kitchen with a stack of papers and a fake, loving smile. He told me they were just some routine documents for our tax filing. I looked through the pile, my eyes scanning the fine print with the speed of a professional. Hidden right in the middle was a deed of trust. He wanted me to put a second mortgage on our house, which would give him access to another $150,000 in cash. He thought he was being clever, but he was just being predictable. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I picked up my special disappearing ink pen, the kind used by magicians and scammers, and signed my name in bold, clear letters. I handed the papers back to him. He looked like he wanted to jump for joy. He didn't know the ink would be gone by dinner. Later that afternoon, I scheduled a private meeting with Mr. Sterling at his club. I didn't mention the affair or the theft yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and showed him a new investment opportunity I had discovered while auditing some local real estate trends. I showed him the listing for a luxury condo unit in the glass tower downtown, Unit 402. I told him I was concerned about the suspicious funding behind the purchase and wanted his expert opinion on the developer. Mr. Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, his eyebrows knitting together in confusion. "That's very strange, Ruth," he said, tapping his pen on the table. "My daughter, Bree, just mentioned she's moving into that exact building this weekend. What a small world." I just nodded slowly, letting the seed of doubt take root in his mind. The night before the big dinner, I decided to play the part of the smitten, obsessed wife one last time. I dressed in the silk robe Silas liked and treated him to a night of intense passion. I made him feel like he had me completely under his thumb, like I was a woman who would do anything to keep him happy. I wanted him to be exhausted and overconfident. While he fell into a deep, post-intimacy sleep, I moved like a ghost. I grabbed his hand and used his thumb to unlock his phone. I worked quickly, forwarding every voice recording, every photo of him and Bree, and every bank transfer to my own private, encrypted server. By the time the sun began to rise, I had his entire digital life in my pocket. He slept through it all, snoring loudly. I am finally closing the trap. Hit subscribe for more revenge stories to see how I burn his world down. The night of the dinner party finally arrived. Our house was filled with the city's elite, the air smelling of expensive perfume and roasted lamb. I looked radiant in a red dress, the color of a warning sign. Silas was sweating through his tuxedo, his eyes constantly darting toward the front door.
Then, the doorbell rang.
Bree walked in, looking smug and beautiful. She was wearing my mother's diamond bracelet, the fake one I had planted. Right behind her was Mr. Sterling, looking stern and observant. Silas looked like he was having a heart attack as his mistress and his boss stood in the same room. I greeted them both with a wide, predatory smile. "So glad you could make it, Bree," I said loudly. "That bracelet looks interesting on you. It's almost like it's a perfect match." After the main course was served, I stood up and tapped my crystal glass with a silver spoon. The room went silent, all eyes turning toward me. Silas was frozen in his chair, his fork halfway to his mouth. "I want to propose a toast to my husband, Silas," I began, my voice clear and melodic. "He's been so incredibly busy lately. He's been managing new assets and secret investments that I didn't even know we had until very recently." Silas stood up abruptly, his chair screeching against the hardwood floor. Ruth, let's not bore the guests with business talk," he snapped, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. He tried to grab the glass from my hand, but I stepped back, my smile widening into something cold and dangerous.
"Oh, it's not boring, Silas.
"It's a love story," I said, my voice echoing through the silent dining room. I reached into my pocket and pressed a button on a small remote. The giant 75-inch TV in the dining room, usually reserved for art slideshows, flickered to life. It didn't show photos of our wedding. Instead, a crystal-clear audio recording began to play. It was the sound of Silas and Bree in the condo. "Ruth is too stupid to check the accounts," Silas's voice boomed through the speakers. The guests gasped, their forks hitting their plates with a collective clatter. I watched Bree's face turn from smug to ghostly white. The audio continued, playing the part where Silas called me a boring nerd who smelled like spreadsheets. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, savoring the absolute silence of the room. Mr. Sterling stood up so quickly his wine glass toppled over, staining the white tablecloth like a pool of blood. He watched the screen as a video from the condo security feed, which I had hacked, showed Silas whispering to Bree on the sofa. "Your dad is an old fool," Silas's voice sneered from the speakers. "We'll be living off his contracts for years while Ruth does all the heavy lifting." Mr. Sterling's face turned a deep, bruised purple. He turned his gaze toward Silas, who was shaking so hard he had to lean on the table for support. "You're using my daughter to steal from my accountant?" Mr. Sterling roared. His voice was like thunder. Bree tried to speak, her lower lip trembling, but her father silenced her with one sharp look of pure, unadulterated disgust. Silas looked like he wanted to vanish. I didn't stop there. I reached into my folder and slid a legal document across the table toward Mr. Sterling. "Silas bought Unit 402 with my inheritance money, Mr. Sterling," I said calmly. "But since the funds were stolen from a joint account through wire fraud, the entire purchase is legally fraudulent." I turned to Bree, who was clutching the fake diamond bracelet on her wrist. "That condo doesn't belong to you, Bree. And neither does that jewelry." Bree tried to run toward the door, her heels clicking frantically on the floor, but her father grabbed her arm with a firm grip. "You're going home right now," he growled. "And you will explain every single cent this man spent on you." The elite guests were whispering loudly now, phones out, recording the downfall of the city's most perfect couple. Silas finally found his voice, but it was a shrill, desperate scream. "I have the papers. You can't do anything." He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out the documents I had signed 2 days ago. "She signed the house over to me yesterday. I have a second mortgage. I have the power." He waved the papers in the air like a madman, looking at the guests as if they would save him. I just leaned back against the wall and crossed my arms. "Look at the pages, Silas," I said softly. He looked down at the documents in his hand. His eyes widened in horror. The signature lines were completely blank. The disappearing ink had done its job perfectly, leaving nothing but clean, white paper. He flipped through the pages frantically, but there wasn't a single drop of ink left. I walked over to the front door and opened it wide. The cool night air rushed in, but it wasn't the only thing waiting. 2 police officers stood on the porch, their badges gleaming under the entryway lights. I pointed a finger at Silas. "The locks were changed while we were having appetizers," I told him. "Your bags are already in the driveway, packed with whatever I felt like throwing in them." Silas looked at the officers, then back at me, sobbing and begging for one more chance. He looked pathetic. "The police are here to talk to you about the $250,000 wire fraud and the identity theft," I added. They stepped inside and clicked the handcuffs around his wrists. As they dragged him out in his expensive suit, he was wailing like a child. The house was finally quiet. The week following the dinner party was a whirlwind of cold, hard facts. I didn't spend my time crying over the broken marriage. I spent it in my home office, where I belonged. As a forensic accountant, I knew that a man who steals $250,000 rarely stops there. I dug into his digital footprint like a surgeon. I found that Silas had opened 3 high-interest credit cards in my name over the last year. He had used my stellar credit score to fund a lifestyle of luxury hotels and designer gifts for Brie. Every time he went to a rehearsal, he was actually maxing out my limits. I didn't hesitate for a second. I compiled every fraudulent application and every forged signature. I reported him for identity theft to every major bureau, adding years to his potential prison sentence. While Silas sat in a cold cell, Brie was facing a prison of her own making. Mr. Sterling was a man of his word and a man of immense pride. He didn't just take away her credit cards, he dismantled her entire social life. He issued a public statement apologizing for her lapse in judgment and cut her off from her inheritance completely. He sent her to a strict behavioral retreat deep in the mountains, a place with no cell service, no internet, and no designer clothes. She was forced to work in the gardens and scrub floors to earn her meals. As a thank you for saving his reputation from a fraudulent son-in-law, Mr. Sterling transferred a $100,000 loyalty bonus to my personal account. He knew I had saved him millions in the long run. The luxury condo in the glass tower was still a point of contention, but not for long. I filed an emergency injunction to seize Unit 402 immediately. Since the money used for the down payment was communal funds stolen directly from my inheritance, the law was on my side. The court moved with surprising speed, awarding the property to me as part of the asset recovery process. I didn't want to step foot in that place again, knowing their photos had once lined the walls. I contacted a real estate agent and sold the unit within 24 hours. I made sure the buyer was a rival actor Silas had envied for years, a man who had beaten him out for every major role. It was the ultimate sting to his ego. The dust seemed to settle, but then the phone call started. Silas had managed to post bail using a shady bondsman and was staying in a crumbling, cheap motel on the edge of town. He called me from a blocked number, his voice no longer sweet or charming. He was desperate and dangerous. "I have private photos of you, Ruth," he hissed into the receiver. "If you don't drop the charges and give me half the house money, I'll leak them to every client you have. I'll ruin your career since you destroyed mine." He thought he still had a card to play. He thought he could bully me into submission. I felt a chill, but it wasn't fear. It was the realization that I needed to strike one last time. I am 10 steps ahead. Hit subscribe for more revenge stories to see how I silenced him forever. The big revenge began the moment I hung up the phone. Silas thought he was the only one who could play dirty, but he forgot that I had his entire cloud storage backup. I didn't just find my own photos, I found a folder labeled assets that contained pictures and bank details of 4 other wealthy women. Silas wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a professional sweetheart swindler. He had a pattern of finding successful, lonely women, draining their savings, and disappearing. He had used the same lines, the same dimpled smile, and the same fake work trips with all of them. I spent the next 48 hours tracking these women down. One by one, I called them and shared the evidence. I wasn't just one stupid wife anymore, I was forming a literal army. The women I called were broken, but my evidence gave them a reason to fight. One had lost her retirement, another had lost her family home. We shared our stories, and the pattern was undeniable. I organized us into a single, massive class action lawsuit. We didn't just want our money back, we wanted Silas to never have a moment of peace again. When Silas received the legal notice at his motel, he realized he wasn't just fighting me. He was facing 4 other angry women he had burned over the last decade. The sweetheart swindler was finally cornered. He tried to call me to beg for mercy, but I had already blocked his number on every device. I wasn't his wife anymore, I was the commander of the army that was going to destroy him for good. I didn't stop at the lawsuit. I used my extensive professional network in the accounting and banking world to blackball him. I sent a detailed risk assessment memo to every major bank and credit union in the state, flagging his name for systemic fraud and identity theft. Within 48 hours, Silas became financially invisible. He couldn't open a new bank account, he couldn't get a credit card, and he couldn't even put a utility bill in his name. No landlord would rent to him with his shredded credit score and the fraud alerts attached to his social security number. He was a man without a country, cast out of the financial system he had spent years exploiting. He was finally feeling what it was like to be truly helpless and without a safety net. The walls continued to close in on him. Silas ran out of the small amount of bail money he had left. The shady motel kicked him out when his last stolen credit card was declined. He tried to sleep in his expensive SUV, the one I had paid for in full as a birthday gift 3 years ago. But I had been tracking the vehicle's GPS through the manufacturer's app. Since the car was in my name and he had violated the terms of our temporary separation agreement, I called a repossession company. At 3 a.m., while he was shivering in the back seat in a parking lot, the repo man arrived. Silas was forced onto the pavement in his pajamas as his last piece of luxury was towed away into the dark night. To ensure he could never use his face to charm another victim, I went after his acting career. I sent the cheating and theft voice recordings and the documentation of his sweetheart swindler passed to every major casting director and talent agency in the country. I wanted his name to be radioactive. Within days, he was fired from his small extra role on a popular daytime soap opera. A local tabloid picked up the story with a headline that went viral: "Scammer Silas, the man who acted like a husband but lived like a thief." His headshots were pulled from every agency website. He wasn't an actor anymore, he was a cautionary tale. He had spent his life wanting to be famous, and I finally made him a household name. For the final blow of the week, I decided to involve the government. I anonymously tipped off the IRS about the unreported gifts and luxury items Silas had accepted from Bree over the last year. I provided them with a detailed spreadsheet of the estimated value of the condo stay, the designer clothes, and the expensive dinners, none of which he had declared as income. The IRS doesn't care about broken hearts, but they care deeply about unpaid taxes. They hit him with a tax bill and penalties that far exceeded the value of the condo he had tried to buy for Bree.
They froze the few assets he had left.
Silas was now being hunted by the only entity more relentless than an angry wife, the federal government. Bree Sterling didn't stay loyal for long. Once the luxury lifestyle vanished and her father's thumb pressed down on her, she flipped like a switch. Wanting to get back into her father's good graces and avoid her own legal trouble, she agreed to testify against Silas. She sat in a cold deposition room and claimed that Silas had coerced her into the affair. She even went as far as to tell the lawyers he had drugged her during their first meeting. I knew it was a lie. They were both willing participants in the betrayal, but I didn't say a word to stop her. I watched through the glass as Silas realized his soulmate had become his biggest enemy. He looked at her with pleading eyes, but she wouldn't even look at him. She was saving herself, just like he had taught her. The day of the trial finally arrived. Silas looked like a ghost of the man I once loved. He couldn't afford a real lawyer, and he was too arrogant to listen to the public defender, so he decided to represent himself. It was a disaster from the first minute. He stood before the judge, trying to use his acting skills to cry on cue. "I just wanted a life I deserved," he shouted, his voice cracking with fake emotion. He tried to paint me as a cold, calculating woman who never gave him enough attention. The judge, a woman who had seen 1,000 scammers like him, didn't even blink. She looked down at him over her glasses and replied, "Mr. Thorne, you deserve exactly what the law provides for thieves." The room went dead silent. The sentencing was the most satisfying moment of my life. The judge listed his crimes like a grocery list of sins: grand larceny, wire fraud, and identity theft. She noted the systemic way he had targeted multiple women, calling him a predator of the heart and the bank. Silas was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison with no possibility of early parole. As the bailiffs moved in to lead him away, he turned to look at me one last time, his mouth hanging open in shock. I didn't look away. I simply reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and held up the screen so he could see it. It was a photo of my current bank balance, $350,000. Between my recovered inheritance and the loyalty bonus, I was wealthier than ever. After the court adjourned, I dealt with the last physical traces of the betrayal. I had kept the fake jewelry Bree had been wearing when the police took her in. I took the glass stones and the cheap metal to a local jeweler. I didn't want to sell them. I wanted them transformed. I had him melt the metal down and create a thick, heavy victory ring that I could wear on my right hand as a reminder of my own strength. But I wasn't done. I spent weeks scouring every pawn shop in the city until I finally found it, my mother's real diamond tennis bracelet. Silas had pawned it for a fraction of its value to pay for a dinner with Bree. I bought it back for exactly $100.
It felt like bringing a piece of my soul home.
I couldn't stay in the house we had shared. Even with the locks changed and his things gone, the air felt heavy with the memory of his lies. Every corner held an echo of a conversation that had been a manipulation. I put the house on the market and sold it within a week. I wanted a fresh start where no part of him had ever stepped foot. I took the proceeds and bought a stunning penthouse in the center of the city. It was in the very same building as the luxury condo I had seized from him, but several floors higher. I wanted to enjoy the exact view he had dreamed of having with Bree. Every night, I would look out at the city lights and know that he was looking at a cinderblock wall. With my life finally stable, I decided to turn my pain into a powerhouse business. I opened my own private firm specializing in divorce forensics. Word spread quickly among the wealthy women of the city. I became the most feared name for cheating husbands and secret gamblers. I knew every trick in the book because I had lived through the masterclass of deception. My office was sleek, modern, and filled with the latest technology to track hidden offshore accounts. One afternoon, my receptionist buzzed my desk. My first high-profile client was waiting in the lobby. She was a poised, elegant woman whose husband had recently bought a suspicious property downtown. I smiled as I looked at her file. She was the wife of the very man who had bought the condo from me. The circle of justice was complete. 6 months into his sentence, a letter arrived at my new office. The envelope was stamped with the federal prison insignia. I opened it with a letter opener shaped like a dagger. Silas's handwriting was shaky, stripped of the bold confidence it once had. He was begging me for money to hire a real lawyer for his appeal. He claimed the prison was inhumane and that he was suffering from depression. He actually had the nerve to say he still loved me and that we were meant to be together. I didn't feel anger, and I certainly didn't feel pity. I simply went to my copier and scanned my latest audit report on his remaining debts. I stamped the word denied across his letter in thick, red ink and mailed it back without a single word of my own. My story eventually caught the attention of a major true crime podcast. They titled the episode, The Accountant's Audit. I sat in their studio and told the world exactly how I had dismantled a professional swindler. I became a symbol of financial empowerment for women everywhere. I taught them that love is a beautiful thing, but a joint bank account requires a watchful eye. A few weeks after the episode aired, I went on a first date with a man who was kind, steady, and successful in his own right. Before we even ordered appetizers, he placed a folder on the table. "This is my full financial disclosure," he said with a wink. "I figured my intelligence should be the second thing you notice about me." He found my brilliance attractive, and for once, I felt truly seen. I sat on my balcony one evening, the wind whipping through my hair. I pulled out my old phone, the one that still held the recordings of Silas and Bree. I scrolled through the files, listening to the echoes of their laughter and their cruel plans one last time. I realized I didn't need the evidence anymore. The court had the records, the banks had the alerts, and Silas had the bars on his windows. I hit the delete button on every single file. I didn't want their voices in my home or my head. But I saved one recording that I had made for myself on the night I found the zero balance. "Never let them see you cry," my own voice whispered. "Let them see you count." I closed the app and felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I am sitting in my penthouse now, swiveling my chair toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city stretches out below me like a map I have finally learned to read. I am drinking the same vintage wine I served at the dinner party, but this time, it tastes like victory instead of bitterness. Silas thought I was just a spreadsheet, something cold, predictable, and easy for him to manage. He didn't realize that spreadsheets are built on logic, and logic always wins in the end. He took my savings, so I took his future, his reputation, and his freedom. It was a fair trade, penny for penny. My life is no longer a shared story of lies and skimming. The audit is officially closed, the books are balanced, and I am finally, beautifully, in the green. Thank you. Please like, share and subscribe for more. Also turn on your notification bell so you be the first to get our next shocking revenge story.